Hey there viewers, welcome back to another exciting episode of Rave All Trades. Next on the bench is a Stihl 028 AV Super. User complained that when it's running on the side, it starts running different. When it's running straight up and down, sometimes it's hard to start, things like that. Normally I would start it up and duplicate the problem first. In this instance, I went ahead and pulled the bar and chain off of it. There is a rattling around inside the muffler. I'm kind of curious if it's running that way because it got hot, because some sort of a leak or something to that regard. Rather than trying to duplicate the problem and possibly cause more damage just in case there is any, we're going to go ahead and disassemble everything. Usually when you see it runs different on the side rather than up, it's usually as a result of the crankcase seals. And while I was buying these on the internet, I went ahead and picked up an aftermarket carb for the just in case. Let's get this thing apart. Like I said, I didn't even clean it or anything yet. I want to get some of this knocked off of here, get it apart. Okay, let's do some detective work. So the spark plug is more of a light brown color. It's telling me it's probably got a leak somewhere. That's what I'm leaning towards right now. Let's get the muffler off, find out what's actually loose inside there. Let's check the condition of that piston real quick. Try to get so you guys can see it. Got a balancing act going on right here. That, my friends, is scoring. See those vertical lines that's coming down, especially like over on that side, and then a couple on this side. You'll get particles in there, it'll lock the rings in place. It'll also decrease compression, it'll do a bunch of things. I'm guessing that we developed a leak somewhere along the way. The saw started running hot or lean, so that's what resulted in that brown plug and the scored up cylinder most likely. Let's go ahead and get the carburetor off of here, pull the cylinder off, or the jug, whatever you want to call it. Take a look at it and see how bad it actually is. I'm going to go ahead and just pull off the intake boot right here. Down inside here is a flathead screw on a hose clamp. We're going to take that screw loose, pull that boot off. Then we can take out the 4 Torx bolts and pull this off. There we go. The boot's loose. When we get the cylinder loose, we'll be able to do a better job getting it apart. Let's see if we can break loose the Torx bolts. That one was tight. That one was tight. That one was tight. That one was tight. Sorry about my elbow being in the way, guys. I just noticed that. Pull this up off of here. Critical part here, this was our intake side, so this is our exhaust side. We want to make sure that this cylinder is not all chewed up on the inside. I see some marks, but I don't feel them with my fingernail. Something else that I like to see is that the rings sprung free without me doing anything special to them. So there's a pretty good chance that they didn't seize up, but without question, there's some scoring that occurred right there on that piston. See it on the rings. I mean, this dirt right here is from me just now. This the sawdust dirt. I can see vertical lines all the way down the piston. The rings do have some lines on them, and I can feel those with my fingernail. I'm gonna look and see, because this has a pop-up piston, and those are more sought after. So if I can find the exact same piston, great. If I can't, what I'm gonna do is work on cleaning up this piston. Most of your sealing is done with these rings right here, and the rings are definitely gonna get changed. Based on what we have right here, I feel like I should put crank seals in it, and I'm going to change out the rings and possibly the piston. And I'm just going to use a, I'm trying to think of the name of it, that cloth sandpaper type stuff, not emery cloth. And then we're going to be cleaning up all of this dirt and debris before we do an assembly on it. Let me get some parts ordered. Not what I expected. I really expected just to find some seals leaking or a base gasket leaking. I'll put all this stuff in a bucket. I'll be back with you guys as soon as I have the parts. So he wants to go ahead and put rings in this thing, so I ordered a set of Caber rings instead of just the normal aftermarket stuff. So Caber is actually a pretty good brand name. I'm going to pull off the flywheel. I'm using a puller just like this. I'll try to remember to link this in the description, but basically this is for Stihl. One size, another size, just flip it over. Threads into the flywheel. You just tighten down the center bolt. That should pop it loose. If necessary, you can, if this starts slipping on me, you can actually put a wrench on this puller. But it should just come off just like that. No significant banging or nothing like that on it. It just threads into the flywheel. I already pulled off the nut before I turned the video on. We should be able to leave the coil in place. We're going to clean all this out because we're going to be changing that crank seal right there. You can see by the quantity of dirt that's in there, kind of leaning towards that. But no matter what, this thing leaned out. We want to do crank seals, base gasket, make sure everything's nice and tight. Check your intake boot. I think that the exhaust bolt was probably a result of it running lean, because it probably started running really fast and probably vibrated a lot. And that'll sometimes make those come apart. Okay, let's put this sacrificial block in here, because when I go to start turning this, it's going to be spinning that piston around. We don't want it beating up on anything. So this comes off reverse thread. We've got one seal right here, and then the smaller seal right here. We're going to leave those old seals in until we get this thing through a bath of old gasoline or something like that. Get this thing cleaned up, and then once it's all cleaned up, we'll try to clean it out. Most importantly, we want to make sure that this area here stays clean. All I'm going to do is just, like I said, some old gasoline and a paintbrush and just clean this thing up. I'll be back with you guys as soon as the parts come in. Cleaned it up. It's been, I don't know, a couple months since the last time we talked. Anyway, I used some old gasoline. It's a great use for old gasoline. Cleaned it all up. Let's get this piston off of here. Clean up all this debris and everything on a brass wire wheel. We've got a new set of Caber rings. Looks like it came from Wolf Creek Saw Shop. Good price on them. And then I've got a new carburetor and fuel line for it. Let's get this ring out of here, or get this piston out of here. Pull out the circlip or the keeper. I'm going to try to pull the piston wrist pin out. I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to try to leave that keeper in if I can. Put a little punch on this side. I want to hold the piston in my hand to take any kind of slack out of here. And take up the vibration. They generally will push right out. This one's just being a little bit stubborn. Let's go ahead and get the rings off of here. I'm going to try to be gentle with taking them off of here. I know these are the old ones and I'm not going to reuse them. The thing is, I would like to be able to see what the ring end gap is. We're going to clean this up on the brass wire wheel. Just get rid of any kind of marks and stuff. The piston ring does all of the sealing and compression. We're just going to get some of this trash and stuff out of here, get it all cleaned up. Just wanted to see what the ring gap was. Just take and move it down into the cylinder a little bit. Getting close. Looks like the ring end gap was 19 thousandths. Let's see what this new one measures. Pretty close to 5 thousandths. Definitely some wear. I do want to see if I can find out what the ring gap is supposed to be, to see if we need to file some of this to get it out of there. So I'm going to clean this up on the wire wheel and I'll be right back with you guys. Forgot to press record. Okay, so I cleaned up the piston on the wire wheel. Got rid of a lot of the carbon and stuff like that. There's still some trash down inside these grooves. What I did was I took an old ring and I broke it in half, and it makes a nice sharp jagged edge on the brake side, and you can drag it through the grooves to clean out any kind of debris that's left inside those grooves. Just take your time. You just want to get all that grime and stuff out of there. Because if you try to do all that with a wire wheel, you're going to be too aggressive on the edges. Looks like Arborist site says 2 to 3 thousandths, up to about 5 thousandths. That's honestly about what we're at. My 5 thousandths was a little bit snug. Looks like these rings should actually fit pretty well. Let me go ahead and get a little bit of a lubrication on these and get these rings installed. We're going to use a little bit of assembly lube for these. Just for getting them on there. This stuff does not burn, so you don't want this left inside the cylinder. I just want to do it for assembly. So if you notice, the rings have an angle to this side and that side. Those are what fits underneath that pin and that locator pin right there. So we want to make sure the orientation is correct. So for me, the closest is at the bottom and the furthest away is at the top. So let's just ease these on and see what we can get. Okay, got one of them on there. Check your orientation. The one that has to jump 2 gaps is always the hardest. Got that one on. It's kind of slippery. I'm going to wipe off some of this assembly lube, being careful not to get snagged on the rings because they'll break. You can use WD-40, you can use a bunch of other things for that. I just wanted to use the absolute best stuff, you know, the thickest lubrication I could find on there. I said stuff doesn't burn, so you want to make sure you get that all cleaned out of there. At least I don't think it burns. I never looked. It says eye irritant, so don't put it in your eyes. It's a beautiful day out here in the Commonwealth today. Alright, on assembly, you have a mark. Always have a mark. It faces towards the exhaust. The other way you can tell is that the 2 locator pins will be towards the carburetor, so it's going to go on there just like that. So this side is the ring that I didn't take out. We should be able to slide this pin in with minimal effort. Tell you what, I'm going to put a little bit of a 2-stroke on that bearing in there and clean it up at the same time. Okay, a little bit of 2-stroke on this bearing. You can also use the 2-stroke oil as the lubricant for the piston rings, by the way. Let's just put a little bit of 2-stroke on this pin. All right, now the pin goes in. Now the pin goes in easily. Well, not easily, but minor effort to get the pin in. Wrist pin, by the way, that's what that's called. All right, like I said, marking towards the exhaust. There we go, drops right in like it's supposed to. And with any luck, I will be able to put this keeper back in without losing it. Let's see a better angle, so see if you guys can see it. I'm gonna try to put that keeper back in, and when I finish it, I want that gap to be facing straight up. Okay, that took several tries to get it in there, but all right, once it's in, you should be able to move the ring so that that opening for the ring is at the top, and it fits inside a groove inside that piston. There's a groove inside there. I'll wipe off my grubby handprints. So the inside of the cylinder doesn't look bad. If I had a hone, I would definitely use the hone. Take this opportunity to get rid of some of that carbon on the exhaust. Careful not to scratch the exhaust port coming into the cylinder. So anyway, I don't know if you guys can see inside there. There's like carbon built up right here on that edge. I'm going to take a couple minutes and get a little lightweight Dremel tool. Just take my time, and I'm going to clean up these passages. Just get rid of that carbon. I don't want that carbon scaling off. I don't know if you can see it. I'm actually popping chunks off of it. With just a little pocket screwdriver. So I would like to get those carbon pieces out of there. You see all that carbon? Let me get those cleaned up. I'm not going to do any port work on this thing. All I want to do is just clean up the any kind of debris that could come loose. So I'm not building a hot rod saw. I'm just making a worker saw. I'll clean those up, use some Scotch-Brite, and clean this up. I'll be right back with you. Got most of that off of there. Ended up using a dental pick and a Dremel with one of those chainsaw chain sharpener bits that's mostly worn out. Just trying to knock the carbon off of there, and I got most of it off of there. I didn't really do any, like I said, I'm not changing the transfers, I'm not changing the porting, I'm not changing any of that stuff. You want the exhaust as smooth as you can get it. You want the intake a little bit rough. I'm not a saw porter. You want something like that? I would say Tin Man. You can look him up on YouTube. He's excellent at that. Learn a lot from him. Just wanted to clean the carbon off so that nothing could break free and destroy my new rings. Let's get some 2-stroke on here so that when we slide this cylinder onto the piston and the rings, we can get it partially on there. And then before I seat it all the way down, I'm going to put some 1184 sealant on the bottom here. It's not a base gasket delete. It does have a base gasket still. That one's in really good contact right now. All I want to do is be able to seal up any kind of imperfections that may exist there. Get my ring compressor out, make sure that it's clean. Make sure that my alignment pins and rings are in line, which they're not. Get those in line. Let's go ahead and set this on top so that it's ready to compress. Give it a quick compression just to make sure it seals up like it's supposed to. That looks about right. Set this down just a little bit so I have a little bit of a top hat of that piston sticking out so I can start aligning everything. A little bit of two-stroke oil. Make sure I don't have any on this cylinder. Intake goes towards the carburetor, exhaust goes away, spark plug's facing that way. Compress this, and while you're compressing it you have to loosen up just a little bit to let it slide. Oh, missing one. There you go. Pull that out. I'll let this sit here for just a second while I put the gasket sealer on here. I've got my 4 head bolt cylinder bolts. Got the driver to put them in. Hand driver so that I can make sure that they're torqued, tightened down quite a bit. Got my 1184 compound. 1184 gasket sealer. Great stuff. It works fantastic. And then I've got some thread locker for the bolts. Okay, tighten them up in a crisscross pattern. If I had the bolts hanging inside there when I set it down, it probably would have been a little bit easier. I didn't even think about it till after the fact. So you saw what I had to do. Magnet, use a screwdriver and kind of lean it up till it fell into position. The cylinder head's on. We're going to let that set up, let all that dry. The cylinder should move freely. Excuse me, the piston should move freely. Let me see if I can turn it with the flywheel. There you go. Yep. So that's moving freely. Snugged up. We're going to put the boot on. Some people put the intake boot on while they're setting that inside there. You don't always have that luxury, and I'd like to show you how I do it so that if you were changing just the boot, you'd be able to do it. Let's take a break for dinner, and I'll meet back up with you guys. Alright, so it's next day. Let's go ahead and get the intake boot on. if that helps both of us. All right, the clamp we're going to put in as the boot's coming through that hole. We're going to put that clamp right back onto there. Make sure you check that boot for any kind of tears or anything like that. And if you can't push it through like that, there is a good indication that the boot needs to be changed anyway. So I'm just going to push this through far enough to be able to get that clamp on there. So I've just got it sticking through just a little bit. Grab the clamp. I want the flathead side facing up on the other side of the saw. So it goes on just like that. Okay. Hopefully y'all don't hear me sniffling, but I just finished cutting the grass and that pollen's got me some kind of bad. Anyway, the clamp is on just like that. It should be sitting in there somewhat loose. So you see I can move it around. We're going to have it in that position because we're going to take the flathead screwdriver and go right down through this passage to tighten it up. We're going to finish putting this boot on. This boot has two indentations, one there and one here. Those two line up with these two bar studs. So before we tighten it up all the way, we're going to make sure that it's turned the right direction. I called them bar studs. I meant carburetor studs. So right now the boot, I need to get it into place on that cylinder. The boot is through. The clamp, I just pushed it further back. So now it should go straight up because the intake gets smaller as it goes. So you just push the clamp back. And then now the clamp's in the right location to be able to put it back on. All we're going to do is very gingerly put this intake boot around this inlet for the intake. So there's a rib right there. You just have to get it pulled on there. If you do end up using tools, just be very careful. You know, you'll be able to tell if you're going to puncture through something. Just try to get this boot up on here. Sometimes easier said than done. Okay. All right, you can see the, well, maybe you can't. Maybe you can't. The boot is all the way up on the intake, all the way around. Let's grab the clamp and get it slid back into place. Once the clamp slid up into place, grab a long flathead screwdriver, get it turned so that you can reach it through there. I like to grab a Torx driver, something with a blunt end on it, just to hold it in place while I tighten this up. Again, make sure that those two dimples or detents or whatever you want to call it line up there, and then you don't have any kinks in your boot here. While we're here, put this in, a spacer. Some of them have knockouts on here, depends on the model of saw, to make you line it up right. Pull the wires out the way. And this, I'm going to call it a forming ring because I don't know what the real name is, but basically it holds that that gasket that seals on the carburetor. It holds it in place, keeps it shape, helps it seal. It should recess down in far enough to where the rubber gasket is sticking out further than the ring is. Let's go ahead and get the crank seals replaced. I'm just going to try to drive them in a little bit. Sometimes you can make them cant up to make them where you can grab them. Other times you have to run a screw in them and try to pull it out. So let's see what we can come up with. I'm going to try to do this so you guys can see it too. I'm going to try to get on just that outside metal piece right there. All right, well, it drove part of it in and it didn't take the other part out, so I'm going to go take a sharp punch and make a hole. We'll run a screw in there. I'll just take a sharp punch. I'm going to go ahead and punch a hole in the middle of the metal right there. Okay, take a drywall screw. We're going to run that in just enough to where it bites
By doing what we just did, we accomplished a couple things. We knocked the steel loose if it was stuck, and also gave us a chance to possibly take it out without having to punch a hole in it. I just want a little bit of a thread to grab it. We can drive it in further if we need to, but just take a little bit. Okay. Let's try it again. Being careful not to hit anything but the seal. Almost got it. It's funny, it's almost back to where we started, but anyway, almost got it. Use a hand screwdriver when you're doing this so you can feel if anything's going wrong. And there's our seal. You can see the screw never went past the end of the seal. I would have liked to be able to pry on here. I ended up having to pry on this just a little bit. I'm going to go find a socket that's exactly this outer perimeter and get some lubrication so we can put this together. A little bit of 2-cycle. Let's put a little bit on the outside here to help it slide in. Very, 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 very thin coat. Grab my 15mm socket, and I'm very gently going to tap it until it's just flush all the way around. What you can do is offset it a little bit so that the socket's hitting the body. There we go, just like that. This seal is a little bit bigger. Make sure it's the right one. Yep, that's the right one. And do the exact same thing. We're going to try to hit it down, see if that does it, so we can grab it, and if not, we'll poke a hole in it. Almost did. So let's see, let's poke a hole in this side. It's got a little bit of a bite. Not enough. There we go. So just grabbing a little bit of a bite, making sure I'm not touching the side here and I'm not touching the crank there. Sorry, not touching the side here, not touching the crank there. Just got a little bit of a bite. It's okay if we have to do this a few times. Don't want to grab too much. This should pop right out. Again, screw just barely came through that seal. Matter of fact, fell right off. I went through half a gallon of gasoline cleaning this thing up, and I've still got dirt falling out in places. I'm going to put the 15mm socket away and go grab a socket for this one. I'm just trying to make a socket that matches up with the edge so I need it to be much bigger than that. How about a 13/16, which should be 21 millimeter. It's a very light coat on that part. It's a little bit much. I just want to help make sure that it slides in appropriately, and that two-stroke will eventually burn off, but I've never had a seal fall out. Okay, this one's not sliding on like it's supposed to, so we're going to do the plastic trick. Going to wrap it around this shoulder here, so that when this seal slides on, it has like a cone to slide onto. I'll be right back as soon as I find something. Didn't find exactly what I was looking for. We're just going to use a part to a carburetor, that bag that the carburetor came in. What you're looking for is a piece of plastic. Generally 2-liter bottles of Coke and stuff like that do a good job. Water bottles, things like that. Not finding it in my recycle bin right now. So let's get that just tucked through the middle. And all we're trying to do is build a ramp for that seal to go across. So while this is going on, I'm going to be pulling the bag out slightly. Very gently get it started. Now the seals are in. On desk cover, the reverse thread, clutch. Grab a 19 millimeter 3/4 reverse thread. If you have a piston stop, you would put it in now. I cannot find mine. I'm just looking for it to stop making progress. So it wasn't hitting against me, it's trying to spin that side. Let me show you a little trick. You can put in a plug, and it doesn't even have to be very tight, to build a little bit of compression. I don't know if it looks like it's spinning to you guys. Basically, to me, it's just springing back and forth. Make sure that your drum is clean. We need our bearing. Give a little bit of grease to our bearing. And then our oil pump drive gear, I guess. I'm just making sure there's no rubbing, because I didn't like the way that sat down on there too well, but it looks like it may have been that way. Just make sure that the oil pump spins and meshes up with the sprocket coming off of the drum. Put the plastic cover on. Make sure it sits in the groove. That's for your chain. And that side is assembled. Side's a little bit easier. There's a keyway on here. Make sure that lines up. Do not tighten it so you know that that's lined up. This is regular thread, and this one's a 1/2 inch. And like I said, it goes in forward position, forward direction. Y'all can kind of see what this one was doing to see what I was talking about for the other one. It kind of vibrates. If you had a piston stop, like I said, you could set it with a torque wrench or something like that. I've built lots of saws and I always do it this way. And it works well for me. Let's go ahead and get the muffler on. Like getting those good and snug. This one would probably stand some horsepower gains by opening this up a little bit, especially since the spark arrestor is already gone. This is definitely a firewood saw though, so I'm not trying to make a hot rod saw. Just remember, if you open up any of these exhaust passages, number one, it'll probably throw sparks. That's why they want that spark arrestor, so you won't be able to cut wood in national forest a lot of times, assuming you have a permit for it. Number two, it'll be louder, everything else. But the most important, you have to adjust the carburetor to allow for the lack of back pressure. If you don't, the saw usually is going to run lean, get hot, and burn up the piston or rings. So unless somebody actually really wants it done, I usually avoid it. I feel it'll shorten the life of a saw. But some people love the horsepower gains you get out of it. Let's go ahead and just put a new carb on this thing just to see. For some reason I bought it and I cannot remember why. Might have been for the just in case. Been sitting on my bench here a really long time. And there was some reason I opted to buy carb for it. Tighten up your carburetor evenly. So your throttle control lever. Let's see, put that in there like that. Let's put the dead man switch in. The dead man switch goes right behind the trigger like that. And then that connecting rod goes on there like that. I try to get my fingers out the way so y'all can see. It's going to look something like that. Okay. There's a groove right here that throttle linkage is going to go through. There's a screw down here. This area here is going to go over the top of the dead man, and I got to hold all that in place while I'm doing it. That goes in the front. Okay, before we get too far, let's make sure the dead man works. So no throttle, push dead man, throttle works, carburetor springs back like it's supposed to. Let's go through the ground wire. We're going to put a brand new NGK plug in. Starter on. Couple pulls, make sure it's not bound up. The sleeve goes up here. The other three go in any of the other holes. I jumped the gun. I wasn't supposed to put this one on yet. Take that one back out. This one jumps in there. Okay, just like that. Well, that looks good. Sometimes you'll have too long screws for this and too short. The too long usually goes on the side here and the too short go on the bottom. This one's all the same size. She's still got oil in it. I'm guessing it's going to take a number of pulls to pull fuel up in there. Choke position. She needs a carburetor adjustment, I believe. Saw some air bubbles in there. Let's go back to choke and then up one lever for fast idle. She needs a little bit of an adjustment. Before we start adjusting anything, you need to put the load on it. And before we do that, we want to make sure that that passageway right there is clear, that small hole. Ow, that hurt. Because that's where the oil comes out of, right through there. That oil I was pointing out to you guys is one thing is we want to verify that the oiler is working. But also, that passage that I pointed out connects up with that hole right there. That oil comes up into the bar that way through that hole. Then the chain drivers, the part that goes inside the bar, carries it around the sprocket, the front sprocket. That looks about right. Just a little bit of a gap on a pre-stretched chain. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the saw started. I'm going to bring the idle speed up by turning this in until the chain's just starting to roll. And I'm going to take the low jet, which is the one closest to the engine. And I want to be about 1 1/4 turns out as a good starting point. Half, 1, 1 1/4, half, 1. And the high jet, half, 1, 1 1/2, 2. That seems a little bit high for a high jet. Tell you what, let's go ahead and just bring it back to 1 1/4. So both are about 1 1/4. And we're going to bring up the idle a little bit. So what I'm going to be trying to do is get it to where it's just a little bit rich, you know, maximum idle, and then just come a little bit rich. I'm going to adjust my idle speed down at that point to where the chain is just not moving or just barely kicking. And then I'm going to change my, adjust my high jet so that I get a good throttle response and a good burble at the top end. I'm not going to get it perfect because I'm going to need to let that cylinder break in a little bit and cut some wood with it, but I'm going to get this close. Y'all saw the quantity of smoke burning off of this thing just now. Let's go ahead and get it somewhat close so that I can start cutting some wood and make some final adjustments on it. I want to full choke and then up one because it's already warm. Yeah, she just needs a little bit of fuel ran through it and a little bit of break-in time. It's pretty close. So I'm kind of happy with the way it's actually running. Thought it stumbled just a second when I rolled it on its side, but it went away. So I'm keeping an eye on that. I'll make sure it doesn't start running too hot. I would like to see the idle jet out just a little bit more than what it already is, the low jet, because it's sitting right now at 3/4 of a turn. And I usually like them at about 1 1/4 turns out. It doesn't appear to be running lean or hot. Run some fuel through it. Adjust the carburetor a couple more times. I expect after about 1 or 2 tanks that the carb will need a little bit of an adjustment. So as it does a break-in, because remember it's half new parts, half old parts. You guys got something out of the video. I really appreciate a thumbs up. Helps the channel out and tells YouTube I'm doing a good job. Catch you guys on the next one. Thanks for hanging out.